The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside Oatman, Arizona, and Helena Crawford stumbled onto the dusty road with nothing but the worn carpetbag clutched to her chest and the photograph hidden in her bodice. Pressed against her racing heart like a talisman against the past, she was desperate to outrun. It was June of 1884, and the desert heat struck her face like a physical blow after 3 weeks of travel from St. Louis. The air shimmered above the hard, packed earth, and the town before her looked like something conjured from fever dreams, all weathered wood and sun-bleached paint, buildings clinging to the rocky hillside as if they might slide down into the gulch at any moment. Helena pressed her hand against her ribs, feeling the sharp corner of the photograph through the fabric of her dress. Her father's face stared out from that image, young and smiling, taken before the war, before everything went wrong, before the debts and the desperate deal he had made with Marcus Thornton, before Marcus had decided that the debt could be paid with Helena herself. She had run the night before the wedding, taking only what she could carry and the single photograph that reminded her what love was supposed to look like. Her father had loved her mother with the kind of devotion that poets wrote about, and Helena would rather die in this God-forsaken desert than chain herself to a man who looked at her like property, who smiled with cold eyes and talked about breaking her spirit the way one might discuss training a difficult horse. The stagecoach driver tossed her trunk down with a thud that raised a cloud of dust. "You sure about this, miss? Ain't much here for a lady alone." Helena lifted her chin, though her legs trembled beneath her skirts. "I am quite sure, thank you." The driver shrugged and climbed back onto his seat. Within moments, the stage was rumbling away, leaving her standing in the middle of what passed for Oatman's Main Street. The town was small, perhaps 24 buildings clustered along the dirt road that wound through the rocky terrain. She could see a general store, a saloon with batwing doors that swung lazily in the hot breeze, a livery stable, and what might have been a boarding house with a faded sign she could not quite read from this distance. Helena picked up her trunk by one leather handle and began dragging it toward the shade of the nearest building. The weight of it carved a line in the dust behind her, and sweat had already begun to gather at her temples and along her spine. Her corset felt like an instrument of torture in this heat, and her traveling dress, which had seemed perfectly reasonable in Missouri, now felt like wearing a wool blanket in a furnace. She had made it perhaps 20 feet when a voice called out from behind her. "That trunk looks about as happy to be here as you do, madam." Helena turned and found herself looking at a man leading a roan horse toward the livery. He was tall, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean strength that came from hard work rather than leisure. His face was shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see dark eyes studying her with something that might have been amusement or might have been concern. His clothes were dusty from travel, leather chaps over worn denim, a vest over a shirt that had once been white, and a bandana knotted around his neck. A revolver sat comfortably on his hip, and his hands, she noticed, were scarred and calloused. "I am managing perfectly well, thank you," Helena said, hearing the primness in her own voice and hating it. She sounded like her mother's sister, Aunt Beatrice, who had disapproved of everything from laughter to the color yellow. The man's mouth quirked slightly at one corner. Not quite a smile, but close. "Yes, madam, I can see that. You planning to drag that trunk all the way to California, or did you have somewhere specific in mind here in Oatman?" Despite herself, Helena felt a laugh bubble up in her throat, though it came out sounding more like a sob. The absurdity of her situation suddenly crashed over her. She was standing in the middle of a desert town where she knew no one, with less than $40 to her name, no prospects, and no plan beyond getting as far from St. Louis as the stagecoach would take her. "The boarding house," she managed, "if there is one." The man nodded toward the building with the faded sign. "Miss Paulson's place. She is decent enough, keeps clean rooms. Here." He handed the horse's reins to a boy who had emerged from the livery and crossed the distance between them in a few long strides. Before Helena could protest, he had lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing at all. "I will carry this for you. No argument," he added, when she opened her mouth. "My mama would rise from her grave and tan my hide if I let a lady haul her own trunk in this heat." Helena found herself walking beside him, struggling to keep pace with his longer stride. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 25 or 26. His face was tanned dark from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he spent a lot of time squinting against the glare. There was a scar along his jaw, white against the darker skin, and his hair, what she could see of it beneath his hat, was dark brown and curling slightly at his collar. "I am Helena Crawford," she said, because it seemed rude not to introduce herself to someone carrying her belongings. "Gideon Zane," he replied. "Most folks just call me Gid." He glanced at her sideways as they walked. "You running from something or towards something, Miss Crawford?" The directness of the question startled her. In St. Louis, no one would have dreamed of asking something so personal of a stranger. But this was not St. Louis, and perhaps the rules were different here in the territories. "Does it matter?" she asked quietly. "Might," Gideon said. "Oatman is a small town. Folks notice things. If someone is going to come looking for you, best to know ahead of time." Helena's hand went automatically to her bodice, pressing against the photograph hidden there. "I have every right to be here. I have done nothing wrong." "Didn't say you had." They had reached the boarding house steps, and Gideon set her trunk down carefully. But running away and doing something wrong are not always the same thing. Sometimes the wrongest thing you can do is stay put. He touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Paulson will take good care of you. She is tough as boot leather but fair. You need anything, I work at the Silver Bell Mine, north end of town. Easy enough to find." He was turning to go when Helena found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Why are you helping me?" Gideon paused, looking back at her. The afternoon sun caught his face full on, and she saw kindness in those dark eyes and something else. Something sad and understanding. "Because somebody helped my sister once when she needed it. Figured I owed the world a debt." He tipped his hat again and was gone, his long strides carrying him back toward the livery before Helena could think of anything to say. She stood there for a long moment, her hand still pressed against the photograph over her heart, and watched him disappear around the corner. Then she turned and climbed the steps to knock on Miss Paulson's door. The boarding house proprietress turned out to be a woman of perhaps 50, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything about Helena in a single sweeping glance. She was thin as a rail, with the kind of wiry strength that suggested she did not tolerate nonsense from anyone. "You are the one who came in on the stage," Miss Paulson said. It was not a question. "Looking for a room?" "Yes, madam, if you have one available." "Got 2 empty right now." "One is $3 a week, includes breakfast and supper. Laundry is extra. No men above the stairs, no drinking, no loud noises after 9 o'clock. You pay a week in advance." Miss Paulson crossed her arms. "You looking for work or just passing through?" "I need work," Helena admitted. "I have some money, but it would not last long." Miss Paulson's expression softened slightly. "Can you cook?" "Yes, madam, and sew and keep accounts and clean." "The restaurant 2 doors down needs help. Owner is Mabel Chen, came here from San Francisco about 5 years back. She is a good woman, pays fair. Tell her I sent you." Miss Paulson stepped back to let Helena enter. "But first, let us get you settled. You look about ready to fall over." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a wardrobe, and a single window that looked out over the rocky hillside. Helena paid for the first week from her carefully hoarded money and waited until Miss Paulson had left before she carefully removed the photograph from her bodice. The edges were worn soft from handling, and the image had faded slightly, but she could still see her father's young face, his arm around her mother, both of them laughing at something beyond the frame. This was all she had left of the life before. Before her mother died of influenza when Helena was 12. Before her father's shipping business failed. Before the debts piled up like drifting snow. Before Marcus Thornton had offered to pay everything in exchange for Helena's hand in marriage, and her father, desperate and broken, had agreed. She had loved her father once, but she could not forgive him for that. Could not forgive him for looking at her with those tired, defeated eyes and telling her it was for the best, that Marcus was a successful man, that she would want for nothing. As if wanting for things was the same as wanting for love, for kindness, for a future that was hers to choose. So she had chosen this. The photograph had been her mother's most treasured possession, and Helena had taken it the night she fled, along with what little money she had managed to save from the household accounts over the past year. She had left a note saying only that she was sorry, but she could not marry Marcus Thornton. And then she had walked out into the spring darkness and not looked back. Now she was here, in a town called Oatman in the Arizona Territory, where the heat was brutal and the ground was hard, and a man named Gideon Zane had carried her trunk without asking for anything in return. Helena tucked the photograph carefully into the drawer of the washstand, beneath the plain white towel that Miss Paulson had provided. Then she poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed her face and hands, feeling the dust and grime of travel sluice away. When she looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized the face that stared back. Her dark blonde hair was escaping its pins in wild tendrils, her gray eyes looked enormous in her pale face, and there were shadows beneath them that spoke of too many sleepless nights. But she was here. She was free, and that had to be enough. After changing into a slightly less travel-worn dress, Helena made her way to the restaurant Miss Paulson had mentioned. It was a small establishment with whitewashed walls and blue-painted shutters, and the smell of cooking food made Helena's stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. She could not remember the last time she had eaten anything more substantial than the dry biscuits she had bought at one of the stage stops. Inside, the restaurant was dim and cool, a relief from the hammer of the afternoon heat. There were half a dozen tables covered in blue checked cloths, and a Chinese woman stood behind a counter, chopping vegetables with quick, efficient movements. She looked up when Helena entered, her dark eyes curious. "We are not open for supper yet," she said. Her English was perfect, barely touched by an accent. "Another hour." "Miss Paulson sent me," Helena said quickly. "She said you might need help. I am looking for work." The woman set down her knife and wiped her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 35, with her black hair pulled back in a simple braid, and she moved with the kind of grace that came from complete confidence in her own space. "You can cook?" "Yes, madam. And I am a hard worker. I can clean, serve tables, keep accounts, whatever you need." Mabel Chen studied her for a long moment. "You are running from something." It seemed to be the question everyone asked in this town. Helena lifted her chin. "I am running towards something better." "Good answer." Mabel smiled slightly. "I need someone who can work breakfast and lunch, 6 days a week. Sunday is your own time. I pay $1 a day plus you can eat here. But I need someone reliable. Too many girls come through here thinking the West is going to be some grand adventure. Then they run off with the first cowboy who sweet talks them, and I am left short-handed again. I am not looking for adventure, Helena said firmly. I am looking for a life. Even better answer. Mabel pulled a clean apron from beneath the counter and held it out. You start tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock, and eat something now. You look like you might blow away in a strong wind. Helena took the apron, feeling something tight in her chest begin to loosen. Thank you, truly. Thank me by showing up on time and working hard. Now sit. Mabel pointed to one of the tables. I will bring you food. The meal that appeared before her a few minutes later was simple but delicious. Rice with vegetables and chicken, flavored with ginger and garlic, and something else Helena could not identify, but that made her mouth water. She ate too quickly, barely tasting it, her body demanding fuel after weeks of poor stage-stop food. Mabel watched her from behind the counter, that small smile playing at her lips. When did you last eat properly? Helena thought about it. St. Louis, 3 weeks ago. Eat more slowly or you will make yourself sick. But Mabel's voice was not unkind. There is more if you want it. Helena forced herself to slow down, to savor each bite. Through the window, she could see the town going about its late afternoon business. Miners heading home from the silver works, their faces and clothes coated in dust. Women carrying baskets from the general store. A group of children playing some kind of game in the street that involved a stick and a great deal of shouting. And walking past the window, tall and easy in his stride, was Gideon Zane. He glanced toward the restaurant as he passed, and their eyes met through the glass. He nodded slightly, that same almost smile on his face, and then he was gone. That is Gideon Zane, Mabel said, following Helena's gaze. Good man. Works hard, does not drink much, does not cause trouble. His sister lives in Prescott with her husband and their children. Gideon sends them half his wages every month. Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks at being caught watching him. He helped me with my trunk earlier. That sounds like him. Mabel brought over a pot of tea and 2 cups, settling into the chair across from Helena. I am going to tell you something and you can take it or leave it as you choose. But this town is full of men and short on women. You are going to get attention whether you want it or not. Most of the men here are decent enough, but some are not. You watch yourself, and if anyone gives you trouble, you tell me. Understood? Yes, madam. Helena wrapped her hands around the teacup, grateful for something to hold. I am not interested in men. I just want to work and save money and maybe, someday, have a little place of my own. Nothing wrong with that, but life has a way of surprising us. Mabel sipped her tea. I came here planning to stay 6 months and then go back to San Francisco. That was 5 years ago. Now I cannot imagine being anywhere else. What made you stay? Mabel's smile turned sad. That is a story for another time. For now, you finish eating, then go get some rest. 5 o'clock comes early and the breakfast crowd will work you hard. Helena finished her meal and made her way back to the boarding house as the sun began its descent toward the rocky western horizon. The temperature had dropped slightly, becoming almost bearable, and she could hear music drifting from the saloon. Someone was playing a fiddle, bright and lively, and voices were raised in laughter in her small room. Helena carefully unpinned her hair and brushed it out, working through the tangles that 3 weeks of travel had created. Through the window, she could see the hills turning purple and gold in the fading light, and above them, the sky was already showing the first stars. The vastness of it all made her feel both terribly small and strangely free. No one in St. Louis knew where she was. Marcus could not find her here. For the first time in months, she could breathe without feeling like a trap was closing around her throat. She retrieved the photograph from the drawer and studied it again in the lamplight. Her parents looked so young, so happy, so certain that the future held nothing but good things. They had been wrong, of course. Her mother had been dead before she reached 40, and her father had drunk himself into an early grave last winter, leaving Helena alone with his debts and his mistakes. But they had loved each other. That had been real. Helena tucked the photograph away again and climbed into bed, though the sky outside was still more light than dark. Her body ached with exhaustion, and her mind felt stuffed with cotton. She was asleep within minutes, dreaming of endless roads and burning sun and dark eyes that watched her with unexpected kindness. The next morning arrived with brutal efficiency. Miss Paulson knocked on her door at 4:30, calling out that breakfast was on the table and she had best eat something before starting work. Helena dressed in the dark, fumbling with buttons and laces, and made her way downstairs to find a simple meal of eggs and bread waiting. She ate quickly, grateful for the food, and was at Mabel's restaurant before the clock struck 5. Mabel was already there, of course, building up the fire in the stove and laying out ingredients with practiced efficiency. She handed Helena a clean apron and a white cap to cover her hair, and then the work began in earnest. The breakfast crowd started arriving at 6, mostly miners heading to the silver works. They were a rough bunch, loud and hungry, calling out orders and joking with each other in voices that carried. Helena learned quickly to balance multiple plates at once, to remember who wanted coffee and who wanted water, to dodge wandering hands without making a scene. Mabel had not been exaggerating about some of the men. Gideon Zane came in around 6:30, taking a seat at a small table near the window. He had clearly washed before coming, his hair still damp and his face clean, though his clothes were the same worn work clothes from yesterday. When Helena approached with her order pad, he looked up at her with those dark eyes, and something in her chest did an odd little flip. "Good morning, Miss Crawford. I see Mabel hired you." She did. "And please call me Helena." The formality seemed ridiculous here, where everyone was covered in dust and sweat by midday. "What can I get for you?" "Eggs, beans, bread, and coffee. Lots of coffee." He paused. "You settling in all right?" "I think so. Everyone has been very kind." She wrote down his order, conscious of his eyes on her face. "Thank you again for helping me yesterday." It was nothing. But he smiled when he said it, a real smile that changed his whole face, making him look younger and less guarded. "Welcome to Oatman, Helena." She found herself smiling back before she caught herself and hurried away to place his order. Behind the counter, Mabel gave her a knowing look but said nothing. The morning passed in a blur of activity. Helena's feet ached, her back hurt, and her arms felt like lead from carrying heavy plates and pots of coffee. But there was a satisfaction in it too, in working hard and doing it well, in earning her own money through her own effort. No one here cared about her family name or her father's debts or the scandal she had left behind. They cared whether she brought the right order and kept their coffee cups full. Gideon left with the rest of the miners, heading up the hill toward the silver works. Helena watched him go, tall and straight-backed among the crowd, and found herself wondering about him, about the sister he supported, about what had brought him to this hard-scrabble mining town, about the sadness she had glimpsed behind his smile. "You could do worse," Mabel said quietly, appearing at her elbow. Helena felt her face heat. "I am not looking. Maybe not, but he is." Mabel squeezed her shoulder. "Take a break. Lunch crowd will not start for another hour." Helena stepped out into the morning heat, grateful for the brief respite. The sun was already fierce, and she could feel sweat gathering beneath her dress and apron. She found a spot of shade beside the restaurant and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes and just breathing. She had been in Oatman for less than a day, but already she felt the city girl she had been starting to fade. Her hands, which had been soft from a life of relative ease, were already reddening from work. Her feet, used to carpeted floors and smooth sidewalks, ached from the rough wooden floors and hard-packed dirt. But she was here and she was free, and she was earning her own way. The photograph hidden in her room felt like a promise. Her parents had found love, real love, the kind that lasted. Maybe someday, when she was ready, when she had built a life that was entirely her own, she might find something like that too. But not yet. Not while she was still running. Not while the wounds were still fresh. She pushed off from the wall and went back inside to help Mabel prepare for lunch. The days fell into a rhythm. Helena rose before dawn, ate breakfast at Miss Paulson's boarding house, worked the morning shift at Mabel's restaurant, had a few hours to herself in the afternoon, and then returned for the supper shift. The work was hard, but she found she did not mind. There was something deeply satisfying about falling into bed each night with the bone-deep tiredness that came from honest labor. Gideon came in most mornings for breakfast, always taking the same table near the window. He was not chatty like some of the other miners, but he was unfailingly polite, and sometimes he would tell her things about the town or the territory. About the silver mine where he worked, how it had been discovered by a prospector who had been half dead from thirst and thought he was hallucinating. About the Mojave people who had lived in these hills long before the miners came. About the wild burros that roamed the streets, left over from the early mining days and now considered almost like town mascots. Helena learned other things from Mabel and Miss Paulson and the other women in town. She learned that Oatman sat in the Black Mountains, at an elevation that made the nights cold even when the days were brutally hot. She learned that the silver mine employed most of the men in town and was owned by a company back east that cared more about profit than about the men who worked in the dark every day. She learned that water was precious, that dust was everywhere, and that the summer monsoons, when they came, could turn the gulches into raging torrents in minutes. She also learned, though no one said it directly, that people were curious about her. A young woman traveling alone, with no family and no past she was willing to discuss, was a source of endless speculation. Miss Paulson shut down the worst of the gossip with a sharp word, and Mabel did the same in her restaurant, but Helena could feel the questions hanging in the air. 3 weeks into her stay, she was serving lunch when a man she had never seen before walked into the restaurant. He was well dressed by Oatman standards, wearing a suit that had been tailored to fit and boots that looked expensive. His hair was oiled back from his forehead, and his face had the pale, indoor look of someone who did not work with his hands. When he looked at Helena, his eyes were cold and assessing in a way that made her skin crawl. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "I am looking for information." His accent was Eastern, possibly New York. "I am trying to locate someone, a young woman traveling alone. She would have arrived here sometime in the last month." Helena's heart began to pound so hard she thought surely he must be able to hear it. "This is a restaurant, not an information bureau. I am willing to pay for useful information." He pulled a photograph from his pocket and laid it on the nearest table. Helena's blood turned to ice. It was her. The picture had been taken at the engagement party Marcus had thrown last winter, when she had still thought perhaps she could go through with it. She was wearing a dark green dress and her mother's pearls, and her smile looked like something carved from stone. "Have you seen this woman?" the man asked. Helena forced herself to look at the photograph as if she were studying a stranger. "No, many people pass through here, but I would remember her. She looks like quality." The man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Indeed she does. Her name is Helena Crawford, though she might be using a different name. Her fiancé is quite anxious to find her. He is offering a substantial reward for information leading to her whereabouts." How much? The question came from one of the miners at a nearby table, a man Helena did not know well. $500. The restaurant had gone quiet. $500 was more money than most of these men would see in a year. Helena felt the walls closing in, felt the trap snapping shut after all. Then Mabel's voice cut through the silence. I said, we have not seen her. And we do not appreciate strangers coming in here and interrupting lunch service. If you want to eat, order something. If not, get out. The man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. My apologies. I did not mean to cause offense. He picked up the photograph and tucked it back into his pocket. If anyone does see her, I am staying at the hotel for the next few days. The name is Garrett, Thomas Garrett. He left, and the normal sounds of the restaurant slowly resumed. But Helena could feel eyes on her, curious and calculating. She forced herself to keep working, to act as if nothing had happened, but her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped a plate. When the lunch rush finally ended, and she and Mabel were alone in the kitchen, the older woman turned to her with serious eyes. That was you in the photograph. It was not a question. Helena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. This fiancé, he hurt you, not physically, but he would have. Helena wrapped her arms around herself. He told me I was too spirited, that he looked forward to breaking me in. Like I was some wild horse to be tamed. Mabel's face hardened. And your family allowed this. My father was desperate. He had debts. Marcus offered to pay them in exchange for my hand. Helena looked down at her hands, at the work-roughened skin and the calluses forming on her palms. I could not do it. I could not marry him, so I ran. Good. Mabel gripped her shoulders. You did the right thing. But now we have a problem. That man is clearly a private investigator, and he is not stupid. If he saw you today, he might have recognized you despite your efforts to hide it. What should I do? For now, nothing. Go back to the boarding house and stay there. I will handle the supper service tonight, and I will talk to some people. What people? Mabel's smile was fierce. You are not the only person in this town running from something. We look out for each other here. Now go. Helena fled to the boarding house, her mind racing. She should have known Marcus would not give up so easily. $500 was nothing to him, but it was a fortune to the people here. How long before someone decided the reward was worth betraying a stranger? Miss Paulson was waiting in the front room when Helena came through the door. The older woman took one look at her face and stood up. I heard about the man in the restaurant. Come with me. She led Helena upstairs to her own private rooms, which Helena had never seen before. They were surprisingly cozy, with embroidered cushions and lace curtains and photographs on the walls. Miss Paulson gestured for Helena to sit, then poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a cut glass decanter. Drink it. You look like you need it. Helena had never liked whiskey, but she drank it anyway, feeling the burn all the way down. How did you hear already, small town? News travels faster than wildfire. Miss Paulson settled into the chair across from her, studying Helena over the rim of her glass. The way I see it, you have 3 choices. You can run again, hope he does not find you wherever you go next. You can turn yourself in, go back to whatever you are running from, or you can stay and fight. Fight how? He has money. He has hired investigators. What do I have? You have us. Miss Paulson's voice was firm. You have been working hard, paying your way, causing no trouble. People here respect that. More importantly, you have caught the eye of Gideon Zane, and that young man is about as respected as they come in this town. If he stands with you, others will too. Helena felt her cheeks flush. I barely know him, maybe so, but he knows you well enough. I have seen the way he looks at you. Like you are water in the desert. Miss Paulson leaned forward. I am going to tell you something I have never told anyone else in this town. 20 years ago, I ran away from my husband back in Kansas. He was a drunk and a brute, and he would have killed me eventually if I had stayed. I have been Helena Crawford, hiding under a different name and building a new life. So I know what you are facing. And I am telling you, running gets exhausting. Eventually, you have to make a stand. What happened to your husband? He died in a bar fight 5 years after I left. But by then, I was already Miss Paulson, and I had built a life I was not willing to give up. She refilled both their glasses. You are not married to this man, Helena. He has no legal claim to you, and this is the Arizona territory, not St. Louis. The law here is a lot more flexible, and it tends to side with people who work hard and cause no trouble. But the investigator is staying at the hotel, which is run by my cousin Frank. I will have a word with him, and Mabel will talk to the people she knows. By tomorrow, half the town will be willing to swear they have never seen anyone matching your description. Miss Paulson's smile was sharp. We take care of our own here. You are one of ours now. Helena felt tears prick at her eyes. Why are you helping me? Because someone should have helped me all those years ago, because you remind me of myself, and because I like you, girl. You have spine. Miss Paulson raised her glass, to making a stand. Helena clinked her glass against Miss Paulson's, feeling something fierce and bright kindle in her chest. To making a stand. That evening, there was a knock on Helena's door. She opened it to find Gideon Zane standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands and his expression serious. May I speak with you? Miss Paulson appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes sharp. The door stays open and you talk where I can see you. Yes, madam. Gideon did not seem offended by the rules. He waited for Helena to step out into the hallway before speaking, his voice low. I heard what happened at the restaurant. Mabel told me. She should not have. Helena could not meet his eyes. This is not your concern, maybe not, but I am making it my concern. He was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. When my sister Mary was 17, she ran away from home because our stepfather was hurting her. She made it as far as Prescott before she ran out of money. A woman there took her in, gave her work, protected her. That woman probably saved Mary's life. I have always wished I could thank her, but she died before I got the chance. Helena looked up at him. So you are paying it forward. Something like that. His dark eyes were steady on hers. I do not know what you are running from, Helena, but I know running and I know fear, and I know what it looks like when someone is trying to build a new life from nothing. You deserve a chance to do that without being dragged back to something you do not want. The investigator is offering $500. That is a lot of money. It is, and maybe someone will take it, but I am betting most folks around here will not. You have been working hard, treating people with respect. That counts for more than money to most of the people in this town. He hesitated, then added, and if anyone does try to cause you trouble, they will have to go through me first. Helena's throat felt tight. Why would you do that? You barely know me. I know enough. Gideon met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her breath catch. Not pity, not charity, but something warmer and more dangerous. I know you are brave enough to choose the unknown over a life you did not want. I know you work harder than half the men at the mine. I know you have a smile that could light up this whole town when you let it show. He cleared his throat, looking suddenly embarrassed. And I know I would like to get to know you better if you would allow it. Helena's heart was pounding again, but for an entirely different reason than earlier. Gideon, I am not looking for romance. I just escaped from one engagement. I am not ready for anything else. I am not asking for an engagement. I am asking if I can call on you, talk with you. Maybe take you walking on Sunday afternoon when you are not working. His smile was gentle. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other. She should say no. She had come here to build a life on her own terms, not to immediately get tangled up with another man. But Gideon Zane was not Marcus Thornton. He did not look at her like property or a prize. He looked at her like she was a person, complicated and real and worthy of knowing. "All right," she heard herself say, "you can call on me." His smile could have lit the whole desert. "Sunday, then. I will come by at 2 o'clock if that suits you." "That suits me fine." After he left, Helena leaned against her closed door, her heart racing. Through the thin walls, she could hear Miss Paulson humming something that sounded suspiciously like a wedding march. And despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty, Helena found herself smiling. The next few days were tense. Thomas Garrett, the investigator, made the rounds of the town, showing Helena's photograph and asking questions. But everywhere he went, he met the same wall of polite unhelpfulness. No one had seen her. No one knew anything. The stage drivers could not remember who had been on their coaches. The hotel clerk had no records of a woman traveling alone. Helena stayed mostly inside, helping Mabel in the kitchen rather than serving tables. It chafed to hide, but she understood the necessity. On Friday afternoon, she was peeling potatoes when Mabel came into the kitchen with news. "Garrett is leaving tomorrow morning. Frank at the hotel heard him making arrangements for the next stage out." Helena set down her knife, hardly daring to believe it. "He is giving up, for now at least. He has been here almost a week and has gotten nowhere. I suppose he figures his employer's money is better spent looking elsewhere." Mabel's smile was satisfied. "We are a stubborn bunch when we want to be." That evening, for the first time in days, Helena ventured out for a walk. The sun was setting, painting the rocky hills in shades of gold and crimson, and the air had cooled to something almost pleasant. She walked slowly through the town, nodding to people she passed, letting herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was safe. She was standing at the edge of town, looking out at the vast sweep of desert that stretched toward the horizon, when Gideon appeared beside her. He did not say anything at first, just stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking at the same view. "First time I came out here," he said finally. "I thought it was the most God-forsaken place I had ever seen. Nothing but rock and dust and heat. But after a while it gets into your blood. All that space, all that sky, makes you feel like you could be anyone, do anything." "Is that why you came here, to be someone different, something like that?" He glanced at her. "After Mary ran away, things got bad at home. Our stepfather blamed me, said I should have stopped her. He got meaner, drank more. When I turned 18, I left and came west. Spent a few years drifting before I ended up here. Found out Mary had settled in Prescott and was doing well, started sending her money to help out." He shrugged. "Not much of a story, but it is mine." "It is a good story," Helena said quietly. "You are a good brother. I try to be." "Mary and her husband, they have 3 kids now. Beautiful family, I visit when I can." He turned to face her fully. "What about you? What brought you west?" Helena hesitated, then pulled the photograph from her pocket. She had started carrying it with her, a reminder of why she had run and what she was searching for. She handed it to Gideon, and he studied it in the fading light. "Your parents?" "Yes, they loved each other so much. My mother used to say she knew the moment she met my father that he was the one. And he felt the same way." Helena took the photograph back, tracing her finger over the worn edges. "When she died, he fell apart, started drinking, made bad business decisions. By the time I was old enough to help, the damage was done. He was deep in debt to a man named Marcus Thornton." "The fiancé?" "Yes, Marcus offered to clear the debts if I would marry him. My father agreed without even asking me." The old anger rose in her throat. "Marcus was not unkind at first. He was charming, generous." But then he started making comments about how I needed to be more obedient, more docile. He told me he would teach me my place, and I realized he did not want a wife. He wanted something he could control. Gideon's jaw was tight. So you ran. So I ran. Helena looked out at the darkening hills. I do not know if I will ever be able to have what my parents had, but I know I would rather die than have what Marcus wanted to give me. You will find it, Gideon said with quiet certainty. Love like that. Someone who sees you for who you are and loves you for it, not in spite of it. How can you be sure? He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, like he was choosing each word with great precision. Because I am starting to see it. Who you are, I mean. You are brave and stubborn and kind. You work harder than anyone I know. You have a laugh like music when you let it out, and you are beautiful, but I do not think you even know it. He cleared his throat. Any man would be lucky to earn your love, Helena, not own it, earn it. Helena's breath caught. They were standing close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of him in the cooling air. For a wild moment, she thought he might kiss her, thought she might let him. But instead he stepped back, putting proper distance between them. I should walk you back before Miss Paulson comes looking for you with a shotgun. The spell broke, and Helena laughed, the sound bubbling up unexpectedly. She probably would, too. They walked back through the quiet streets, not touching but somehow together in a way that felt more intimate than touching would have been. At the boarding house steps, Gideon reminded her about Sunday, and she promised to be ready at 2 o'clock. Then she went inside, climbed the stairs to her small room, and sat on the bed with the photograph in her lap, thinking about what love meant and whether she had the courage to try again. Sunday arrived bright and clear, one of those perfect early July days when the heat had not yet climbed to unbearable levels. Helena dressed carefully in her best remaining dress, a light blue cotton that her mother had made for her years ago. It was a bit worn at the cuffs and hem, but it was clean and pressed, and it made her eyes look more blue than gray. Miss Paulson gave her an approving nod when she came downstairs. You look lovely, and Gideon Zane is a good man, but you remember what I told you about keeping your wits about you. Yes, madam. Gideon arrived precisely at 2, looking scrubbed and nervous in clean clothes and a hat he had clearly brushed free of dust. He offered Helena his arm, and they set out walking through the town and up into the hills beyond. The desert landscape, that had seemed so harsh and forbidding when Helena first arrived, now struck her as beautiful in its own stark way. The rocks glowed in the afternoon sun, and hardy desert plants clung to life in the thin soil, their flowers bright splashes of color against the brown and gray. Gideon pointed out things as they walked, the burrow tracks in the dust, the circling hawks overhead, the old mine shafts that dotted the hillsides like dark eyes. You have to be careful up here, he said. Some of these old shafts are deep and hidden. A man could fall in and never be found. Cheerful thought, he grinned. Just trying to impress you with my extensive knowledge of the area. Consider me impressed. Helena found herself smiling back, surprised at how easy it was to be with him. There was none of the forced formality that had characterized her interactions with Marcus, none of the feeling that she was being constantly judged and found wanting. With Gideon, she could just be herself. They climbed to a flat outcropping of rock that overlooked the town and the valley beyond, and Gideon spread his coat on the ground for Helena to sit on. She protested that it was not necessary, but he insisted, and she settled onto the fabric, tucking her skirts around her legs. Gideon sat beside her, not too close but not distant either, and for a while they just looked at the view in comfortable silence. Tell me about your sister, Helena said eventually. Mary, what is she like? Gideon's face softened. She is strong, stronger than anyone gives her credit for. When she ran away, she was terrified, but she did it anyway, and she built a life for herself. Met a good man named James, married him, had 3 kids. She is happy now, really happy. He paused. That is all I ever wanted for her, to be happy and safe. Do you see her often? Once or twice a year. Prescott is about a day's ride from here. I try to go for Christmas and sometimes in summer when the mind slows down. He glanced at her. You would like her. She is a lot like you, actually. Stubborn and brave and determined to make her own way. I would like to meet her someday. The words hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of a possible future, and Helena felt her cheeks warm. But Gideon just smiled and nodded. I think she would like you too. They talked for hours, sitting on that rock as the sun moved across the sky. Gideon told her about his work in the mine, the darkness and danger of it, but also the camaraderie among the men and the satisfaction of a hard day's work. Helena told him about her childhood in St. Louis, the big house that had slowly emptied as her father sold off their belongings to pay his debts. About learning to cook and sew and manage a household because all the servants had been let go. About the feeling of walls closing in as Marcus's engagement ring sat heavy on her finger. When did you decide to run? Gideon asked. The night before the wedding. I was in my room looking at the dress my aunt had made. It was beautiful, all white lace and silk, and I just knew I could not do it. I could not walk down that aisle and promise to love and obey a man who made my skin crawl. So I changed into traveling clothes, packed a bag, took every penny I could find, and walked out the front door. She shook her head at the memory. I have never been so terrified in my life. But you did it anyway. That is the definition of brave. I did not feel brave. I felt like a coward, running away instead of facing things. There is a difference between running away from a fight and refusing to fight on someone else's terms. Gideon's voice was firm. You were not running away. You were refusing to surrender. Helena looked at him, at the certainty in his face, and felt something tight in her chest begin to ease. Maybe he was right. Maybe what she had done was not cowardice but courage of a different kind. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western hills when they finally made their way back down to town. At the boarding house steps, Gideon took off his hat and turned it in his hands, suddenly shy again. I had a good time today. Thank you for allowing me to call on you. I had a good time too, and she meant it. She could not remember the last time she had felt so relaxed, so much like herself. May I call on you again? Next Sunday, perhaps? I would like that. His smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. Helena watched him walk away, then went inside to face Miss Paulson's knowing look and pointed questions about how the afternoon had gone. The summer weeks passed in a blur of heat and work and Sunday afternoons with Gideon. Helena's hands grew calloused, her skin tanned despite her best efforts to stay shaded, and her body grew strong from the constant work. She found she liked this version of herself, this woman who could work a 12-hour shift and still have energy to walk in the hills. This woman who could laugh freely and speak her mind and not worry about whether she was being ladylike enough. Gideon courted her with a patience and gentleness that made her heart ache. He brought her wildflowers from the desert, their blooms bright against the brown landscape. He taught her to identify the different bird songs that echoed through the hills. He shared his dreams of maybe saving enough to buy a small ranch someday, somewhere with water and grass where he could raise horses. And slowly, carefully, Helena let her guard down. Let herself look forward to seeing him. Let herself notice the way his eyes lit up when she walked into the restaurant in the mornings. Let herself imagine a future that included someone else, a partner rather than a master. In August, a monsoon rolled through, turning the sky black and dumping rain on the parched earth in sheets. The streets became rivers, and the gulches roared with brown water. Helena stood at the restaurant window, watching the storm with wide eyes, amazed at the sheer violence of it. "First monsoon?" Mabel asked, coming to stand beside her. "Yes, I have never seen anything like it. They come fast and hit hard, but they are life out here. Without the monsoons, nothing would survive." Mabel squeezed her shoulder. "You are doing well, Helena. I am proud of you." The words, simple as they were, brought tears to Helena's eyes. She could not remember the last time someone had said they were proud of her. Her father had been too lost in his own failures, and Marcus had only criticized, never praised. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For giving me a chance. You earned it." Mabel paused, then added, "Gideon asked me yesterday about whether I thought you were happy here. I told him to ask you himself, but I think he is working up to something." Helena's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "I mean that man is head over heels in love with you, and I suspect he is trying to figure out how to tell you so without scaring you off." Mabel's smile was gentle. "The question is, how do you feel about him?" Helena turned back to the rain-washed window, watching the water pour down. How did she feel about Gideon? The answer came easily, surprising in its clarity. She loved him, loved his kindness and his quiet strength, loved the way he treated her like an equal, loved how he made her laugh and how he listened when she talked. Loved the future she could see beginning to take shape when she was with him. But love was terrifying. Love made you vulnerable. Love gave someone the power to hurt you. "I am afraid," she admitted. "What if I let myself love him and it goes wrong? What if he changes, becomes someone different? What if I am making another mistake?" Those are all fair questions. But let me ask you this. What if it goes right? What if he loves you back the way you deserve to be loved? What if you build something real and lasting together? Mabel turned Helena to face her. "You cannot live your life in fear of what might go wrong. Sometimes you have to take the risk and trust that it will work out." That Sunday, Gideon took Helena to a place he had found in the hills, a small canyon where a spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a pool of clear water surrounded by cottonwood trees. It was an oasis in the desert, green and cool and beautiful. "I found this place about a year ago," Gideon said, helping Helena down from the rocks. "I come here when I need to think, wanted to share it with you." They sat by the pool, dangling their feet in the water, and talked about everything and nothing. But there was a tension in the air, an anticipation, as if they were both building towards something. Finally, as the afternoon shadows grew long, Gideon took Helena's hand. His palm was rough against hers, warm and solid and real. "Helena, I need to tell you something, and I am just going to say it straight out because I am no good at pretty words." He took a deep breath. "I love you. I have loved you since that first day when you came stumbling off the stage looking like you were ready to fight the whole world. I love your courage and your stubbornness and the way you never give up. I love how hard you work and how kind you are to everyone. I love your smile and your laugh and the way you look at the desert like it is the most beautiful thing you have ever seen." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "Gideon." "Wait, let me finish." His grip on her hand tightened. "I know you are not ready to think about marriage or anything like that. I know you are still healing from what happened before, but I wanted you to know how I feel, and I wanted to tell you that I will wait as long as you need. No pressure. No expectations. I just want to be with you, however that looks." Helena could not speak past the lump in her throat. She thought about Marcus, who had demanded her obedience and tried to break her spirit. And here was Gideon, offering her love with no strings attached, willing to wait as long as she needed, asking for nothing except the chance to be near her. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not want to. I tried not to, but I do. I love you so much it scares me." "What scares you?" "Everything. What if you change? What if I am not enough? What if we are making a mistake?" Gideon pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. "I cannot promise we will never have problems. I cannot promise everything will always be perfect. But I can promise that I will never try to control you or break you or make you into something you are not. I can promise that I will respect your choices and listen when you talk. I can promise that I will love you for exactly who you are." He pulled back to look into her eyes. "And I can promise that being with you could never be a mistake." Helena kissed him then, her hands coming up to frame his face, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. All her hope and fear and love, all her dreams for a future she had not dared to imagine. Gideon kissed her back with a gentleness that made her want to cry, holding her like she was something precious. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I want to marry you, Helena. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. When you are ready. Will you think about it?" She thought about the photograph of her parents, young and happy and so certain of their love. Thought about the future she had imagined for herself, independent and alone. Thought about what it would mean to build a life with someone instead of just for herself. "Yes," she said, "I will think about it." As summer turned to fall, Helena and Gideon's relationship deepened. They spent every Sunday together, and Gideon started coming by the restaurant during his lunch breaks just to see her for a few minutes. Miss Paulson relaxed her rules enough to let him visit Helena in the boarding house parlor in the evenings, as long as the door stayed open and someone else was home. Helena learned more about him during those long evening conversations. Learned about his childhood in Kansas, about his mother who had died when he was young and the stepfather who had made their lives miserable. About the day he had come home to find Mary gone and their stepfather in a drunken rage. About the years he had spent drifting, working ranch jobs and mining claims, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. "I was afraid to stay anywhere," he admitted one evening. "Afraid that if I let myself care about a place or people, they would be taken away. Easier to keep moving." "What changed?" "I found out Mary was in Prescott and doing well. Went to visit her, met her family, saw that she had built something real, something lasting. Made me think maybe I could do that too." He reached for Helena's hand. "And then you arrived, and I knew I had found the person I wanted to build it with." In October, Helena received a letter forwarded through Miss Paulson's cousin in Prescott. Her hands shook as she opened it, terrified it would be from Marcus or his investigator. But the handwriting was unfamiliar, and when she unfolded the pages, she found it was from a lawyer in St. Louis. The letter informed her that Marcus Thornton had withdrawn his offer to pay her father's debts, which had subsequently been absorbed by her father's estate. As Helena had legally severed all ties with her father before his death, she bore no responsibility for those debts. Furthermore, Marcus had recently become engaged to another woman, a banker's daughter with better social connections. He was no longer seeking Helena's whereabouts. Helena read the letter 3 times, hardly daring to believe it. She was free, truly free. Marcus had moved on, found another woman to control and break. The thought should have brought relief, and it did, but it also made her sick. Some poor woman was going to suffer what she had escaped. She showed the letter to Gideon that evening, and he read it carefully, his expression darkening. "You should write to her, this new fiancé. Warn her." Helena had thought the same thing, but she shook her head. "She would not believe me. I am a stranger, a woman who ran away from her engagement. Why would she take my word over his?" She folded the letter carefully. "All I can hope is that she is stronger than I was, that she will fight back if he tries to break her." "You were strong," Gideon said fiercely. You were strong enough to run when that was your only option. Do not ever think otherwise. 2 weeks later, Gideon asked Helena to marry him properly with a ring he had saved for months to buy. It was simple, just a thin gold band, but to Helena it was more beautiful than any diamond. They were at their place by the spring, the cottonwood leaves turning gold around them, when he dropped to one knee. "Helena Crawford, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here in this impossible desert? Will you take a chance on a man who loves you more than he ever thought possible?" Helena pulled him to his feet and kissed him, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, yes to all of it. They were married in November in the small church at the edge of town. Mary and her family came from Prescott, and Mary hugged Helena so hard she could barely breathe. "Thank you," Mary whispered, "for making him so happy, for showing him it is okay to stay in one place and build a home." Helena wore her mother's pearls and carried wildflowers, and Miss Paulson cried through the entire ceremony. Mabel provided the wedding feast, a spread of food that had the whole town talking for weeks. The miners passed a hat and collected enough money to give the newlyweds a week's honeymoon at a small ranch outside Prescott. On their wedding night in a small room at the ranch, Gideon held Helena close and kissed her forehead. "Are you happy?" he asked. Helena thought about the terrified girl who had stumbled off the stagecoach in June, clutching a carpetbag and a photograph and running from a life she did not want. Thought about all the miles she had traveled and all the fears she had faced. Thought about the future stretching before her now, full of possibility and promise. "I am happy," she said. "I am finally, truly happy." They honeymooned for a week, riding horses through the hills and talking late into the night. When they returned to Oatman, they moved into a small house Gideon had been renting, and Helena made it home with curtains she sewed herself and furniture they bought piece by piece. She continued working at Mabel's restaurant, and Gideon kept his job at the mine. They were not rich, but they had enough. More importantly, they had each other. Helena kept the photograph of her parents on the mantel, a reminder of what real love looked like. And slowly, she and Gideon created their own photographs, their own memories, their own story. In the spring of 1885, Helena discovered she was pregnant. She told Gideon at their place by the spring, where he had first told her he loved her, and he whooped with joy loud enough to startle a hawk from the cottonwoods. Their son was born in January of 1886, during a cold snap that left frost on the ground in the mornings. They named him Thomas, after Gideon's father, and he had his mother's gray eyes and his father's dark hair. Helena held him in the small house while Gideon hovered anxiously, and she felt her heart expand in ways she had never imagined possible. Miss Paulson declared herself an honorary grandmother, and knitted more baby clothes than one child could ever need. Mabel hired another girl to help at the restaurant, so Helena could take time to be with her son. Mary came from Prescott with her 3 children, and the cousins played together while the adults talked about expanding families and building futures. As Thomas grew, Helena taught him to read using her mother's old books, the ones she had packed in her carpetbag all those months ago. She told him stories about his grandparents, the ones he would never meet, and about the long journey his mother had taken to find home. She showed him the photograph, explaining how love should look, how it should feel. In 1888, their daughter was born, and they named her Rose. She had Gideon's dark eyes and Helena's determination, and from the moment she could walk, she was getting into everything. Thomas, now 2.5, appointed himself her protector and followed her everywhere. The mine where Gideon worked began to play out in the early 1890s, and many families left Oatman in search of better prospects. But Gideon and Helena stayed. They had built a life here, put down roots that went deep into the rocky soil. Gideon found work at a ranch 40 miles north, managing their horse breeding program, and Helena opened her own restaurant in partnership with Mabel. Miss Paulson passed away in 1893, leaving her boarding house to her cousin Frank. In her will, she left Helena a letter that made her cry for an hour. It said simply, "You reminded me why I ran all those years ago, why freedom is worth any price. Thank you for being brave enough to choose yourself. I hope you have found everything you were looking for." By 1895, Oatman was smaller than it had been, but those who remained were bound together by shared history and mutual support. The Zane family was central to the community, their house always open, their table always welcoming. Helena's restaurant became the gathering place for the town, where people came not just for food but for conversation and connection. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Rose was wild and fearless, more likely to be found climbing rocks than playing with dolls. They had Gideon's sister Mary's children as playmates when they visited, and every summer the families gathered at the ranch in Prescott for a week of chaos and laughter and love. In 1897, when Thomas was 11 and Rose was 9, Helena found herself pregnant again. She was 33 now, and this pregnancy was harder than the previous two. She was sick more often, tired more easily. But when their second daughter was born in the spring of 1898, tiny and perfect and crying loud enough to wake the whole town, Helena knew it had all been worth it. They named her Grace, and she looked exactly like the photograph of Helena's mother, with the same delicate features and bright smile. It was like having a piece of her mother back, and Helena cried the first time she held her. Gideon was a devoted father, patient and kind, teaching his children about the desert and the sky and the importance of hard work. He taught Thomas to break horses and Rose to track animals through the rocks. He carried Grace on his shoulders through town, pointing out birds and plants and telling her stories about the world. And every Sunday, unless the weather was truly terrible, the whole family would pile into their wagon and go to their place by the spring. They would spend the afternoon there, the children playing in the water while Helena and Gideon sat beneath the cottonwoods and remembered the day he had first brought her here, the day everything had changed. "You ever regret it?" Gideon asked one Sunday in 1900, watching their 3 children splash and shriek in the pool. "Leaving your old life behind, coming here." Helena thought about St. Louis, about the big house that had never felt like home, about Marcus and the future she had escaped. Then she looked at her children, at the man beside her, at the vast sweep of desert that had become her home. "Not even for a moment," she said. The new century brought changes. Automobiles began to appear, strange mechanical beasts that frightened the horses and covered everything in dust and exhaust. The railroad expanded, connecting even small towns like Oatman to the larger world. Thomas, now 14, talked about going to university someday, maybe studying law or engineering. Rose, 12, wanted to be a rancher like her father. Grace, at 2, just wanted to be wherever her siblings were. Helena's restaurant thrived, becoming known throughout the territory for good food and fair prices. Travelers would go out of their way to stop in Oatman just to eat at Helena's place, as it had become known. She hired local women to help, paying them fair wages and teaching them the skills they would need to survive in this hard land. Gideon's work at the ranch went well, and he was promoted to foreman in 1902. The extra money meant they could afford small luxuries. Store-bought dresses for the girls, books for Thomas, a new rifle that Gideon had been eyeing for months. But more importantly, it meant security, the knowledge that they could weather whatever storms came. In 1905, Arizona Territory was approaching statehood, and there was excitement throughout the region. Helena, now 41, found herself caught up in the discussions about voting rights and women's suffrage. She had never been particularly political in her St. Louis days, but out here, where women worked as hard as men and often held things together through sheer determination, the idea that they should not have a say in their own governance seemed absurd. She wrote letters to territorial representatives, organized meetings in her restaurant, and even traveled to Phoenix once to attend a suffrage rally. Gideon supported her fully, often joking that she was braver than any miner or cowboy he knew. Thomas left for university in California in 1906, though not without long discussions and some tears from his mother. He was 18 now, a young man with his father's steady temperament and his mother's sharp mind. He promised to write every week and to come home for Christmas. Rose, 16 and restless, announced that she had no interest in university and wanted to work full-time at the ranch. After much discussion, Gideon agreed to take her on as his assistant, teaching her everything he knew about horses and ranch management. Helena worried at first, but Rose thrived in the work, becoming as respected among the ranch hands as her father was. Grace, now 8, was the family peacemaker, the one who could smooth over any argument and make everyone laugh. She loved school and loved helping in the restaurant, and Helena could already see her daughter's natural talent for making people feel welcome and cared for. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Thomas graduated from university in 1910 and returned to Arizona, opening a law practice in Prescott. He met a teacher named Sarah, and they were married in 1912 in a ceremony that brought the whole extended family together. Helena cried throughout, remembering her own wedding day and how terrified and hopeful she had been. Rose shocked everyone in 1913 by falling in love with a young Navajo man named Joseph who worked at the ranch. There was talk, of course, some of it unkind, but Gideon and Helena stood firmly behind their daughter. They had learned long ago that love was too precious to deny based on prejudice or narrow thinking. Rose and Joseph were married in a ceremony that blended traditions from both their cultures, and they settled on a small ranch just north of Oatman. Grace, 21 in 1915, decided to attend normal school to become a teacher. She wanted to come back to Oatman afterward and teach at the local school, which had grown as more families settled in the area. Helena could not have been prouder of her youngest daughter, who had grown into a woman of grace and intelligence and fierce compassion. In 1916, as the Great War raged and Europe and America debated involvement, Helena turned 52. She looked at herself in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the woman who stared back. Her hair was more gray than gold now, her hands were rough from decades of work, and her face bore lines that told the story of her life. But her eyes were bright, and she stood straight, and she had no regrets. That evening, she and Gideon sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the hills. Their children were grown and settled, making their own lives but still close enough to visit often. The restaurant was thriving. They had enough money saved to be comfortable. They had weathered droughts and floods, sickness and injury, good times and hard times, and they had done it together. "You remember the first time I saw you?" Gideon asked, taking her hand. His hair was white now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still held the same warmth they had that first day. "You told me my trunk looked as happy to be here as I did," he laughed. "You looked so lost and so determined at the same time. I knew right then you were going to be trouble. Good trouble or bad trouble, the best kind of trouble." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Thank you, Helena, for saying yes, for building this life with me, for giving me a family and a home and everything I never dared to dream about." Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steadiness that had been her anchor for more than 30 years. "I am the one who should be thanking you. You gave me a future when I could not picture one. You showed me what love was supposed to look like." They sat there as darkness fell and the stars emerged, brilliant in the desert sky. From inside the house, they could hear Grace playing the piano, practicing for her church recital. In the distance, a coyote howled, and somewhere closer, one of the town's burros brayed in response. This was home. Not the place, though Helena loved every rock and cactus of this impossible desert. But the life they had built, the family they had created, the love that had sustained them through everything. She had fled west with nothing but a photograph and a desperate hope for something better. And she had found everything she had been searching for, even the things she had not known she needed. In 1918, when Thomas's first child was born, a boy they named Gideon after his grandfather, Helena held him and felt the circle complete. She showed him the photograph, now faded almost beyond recognition, and told him about his great-grandparents who had loved each other so much. About how love could survive anything if you were brave enough to fight for it. By 1920, as Arizona celebrated its 8th year of statehood and women finally won the right to vote, Helena had 4 grandchildren and another on the way. The restaurant was now run primarily by Grace, who had returned to Oatman after teaching for a few years, and decided she preferred feeding people to instructing them. Thomas was making a name for himself as a lawyer who took on cases others would not touch, particularly those involving injustice against minority communities. Rose and Joseph's ranch was thriving, raising some of the finest horses in the territory. Gideon had retired from the ranch, though he still consulted on difficult horses and spent most days at home, working in the small garden he had cultivated and reading the books that Thomas sent him. He was 60 now, his body bearing the scars of a lifetime of hard work, but his mind was still sharp, and his love for Helena had only deepened with time. They had been married 35 years when Gideon woke one morning and could not get out of bed. His left side would not respond and his speech was slurred. Helena sent Grace for the doctor, but she already knew what had happened. She had seen it before in others. The doctor confirmed it was a stroke. Gideon might recover some function or he might not. Time would tell. Helena moved a cot into their bedroom and refused to leave his side, feeding him broth and water, reading to him from his favorite books, talking to him about their life together. Slowly, over the course of weeks, Gideon regained some movement and his speech improved. But he was not the same man who had carried Helena's trunk that first day or held her as they watched storms roll across the desert. He was frailer now, more dependent, and it frightened them both. But their love adapted as it always had. Helena helped him walk, supporting his weight when his legs would not fully cooperate. She learned to understand his sometimes slurred words. And Gideon, for his part, bore his limitations with as much grace as he could muster, never complaining even when she knew he was frustrated and afraid. On a Sunday afternoon in late summer, Helena helped Gideon into their wagon and drove them to their place by the spring. It took careful maneuvering to help him down to the water's edge, but once they were settled on the rocks, their feet in the cool water just like they had done so many times before, Gideon smiled. "Still the most beautiful place in the world," he said, his words slow but clear. Helena squeezed his hand. "I was so scared that first day you brought me here, scared to love you, scared to trust again." "I knew," Gideon said, "could see it in your eyes, but I also saw you were brave enough to try anyway." They sat there until the shadows grew long, remembering everything they had built together. The children and grandchildren, the struggles and triumphs, the ordinary days that had somehow added up to an extraordinary life. Gideon lived another 5 years, growing gradually weaker but never losing his essential kindness or his love for his family. He died in 1925 in his sleep, with Helena beside him. She woke to find him still and peaceful, and she held him and cried, mourning the man who had been her partner, her love, her home. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Arizona. People came from Prescott and Phoenix and towns Helena had never even heard of, all with stories about how Gideon had helped them or shown them kindness. Helena stood between her children, surrounded by grandchildren, and listened to people talk about her husband. And she knew that they had built something that mattered, that would last beyond either of their lives. After Gideon's death, Helena sold the house and moved into rooms above Grace's restaurant. She was 61 now, and the idea of maintaining a house by herself seemed overwhelming. Better to be close to family, close to the sounds of life and laughter. She still worked in the restaurant most days, though not the long hours she once had. She baked bread and pies, taught her grandchildren to cook, and listened to their dreams and fears. She became the family matriarch, the one everyone came to for advice or comfort or just to sit quietly with someone who understood. In 1930, when the country was gripped by economic depression, and people were losing everything they had worked for, Helena remembered what it felt like to have nothing. She opened her restaurant to anyone who needed a meal, regardless of whether they could pay. Grace protested at first, worried about money, but Helena was firm. "We have enough," she said. "And I remember what it was like to arrive somewhere with nothing but hope. We feed people, all people. That is what this place is for." The restaurant became a lifeline for many in Oatman during those dark years. People came in hungry and left fed. Some paid with money, some with labor, some with nothing at all. Helena kept track of none of it, believing that kindness needed no accounting. By 1935, Helena was 71, her body finally beginning to fail in the ways that aging bodies do. Her joints ached, her eyesight was failing, and she tired easily. But her mind remained sharp, and she still told stories to her great-grandchildren about coming west with nothing but a photograph, and finding everything she had been searching for. One evening in late spring, she asked Grace to bring her the old photograph from the drawer where it had lived for more than 50 years. The image was so faded now that the faces were barely visible, but Helena did not need to see it. She had memorized every detail decades ago. "Your great-grandparents," she told the children gathered around her chair. "They loved each other so much. When I ran away from my old life, I took this picture with me because it reminded me what love should look like, and I found it, with your grandfather. We built a life together that was everything I had hoped for and more." The youngest great-grandchild, a girl of 4, touched the photograph gently. "Were you scared, great-grandma?" "Terrified," Helena admitted. "But I did it anyway. That is the secret, little one. You do the scary thing anyway, because the alternative is worse. You choose the life you want, even when you do not know what that life will look like." She died 2 weeks later in her sleep with Grace holding her hand. It was peaceful, the doctor said. She had simply closed her eyes and not opened them again. They buried her next to Gideon in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Oatman. The whole town turned out, along with family from across Arizona and beyond. Thomas, now 63 and retired from his law practice, gave the eulogy. He talked about his mother's courage and kindness, about how she had built a life from nothing, about how she had loved without reservation, and given without expectation of return. Rose, 61, and still running her ranch with Joseph. Read from Helena's favorite psalm. Grace, 57, sang a hymn that Helena had loved. And when it was all over, when the crowds had dispersed, and the sun was setting over the hills, Grace took the old photograph from her mother's possessions and placed it in Helena's coffin before they closed it. It seemed right that Helena should have it with her, this image that had carried her across the country and into a future she could never have imagined. The story of Helena and Gideon Zane became part of Oatman's history, told and retold through the generations. About the young woman who had fled west with nothing but a photograph and a dream of freedom. About the cowboy who had carried her trunk and then her heart. About the life they had built together in the impossible desert, a life of love and work and family. Grace kept the restaurant running until 1945, when she finally retired and passed it on to her own daughter. The building still stands today, though it has changed hands many times. But locals still call it Helena's Place, and sometimes, on quiet Sunday afternoons, people say you can hear the echo of laughter from long ago, from a time when love was simple and pure and strong enough to build a future on. Thomas's descendants became lawyers and activists, carrying on his tradition of fighting for justice. Rose's children and grandchildren remained ranchers, known throughout Arizona for their horsemanship and their fair dealing. Grace's line became teachers and caregivers, people who nurtured and protected others, and all of them carried the story of their great-great-grandmother Helena, who had been brave enough to run toward an uncertain future rather than accept a certain misery, who had learned that love was not about control or possession, but about partnership and respect, who had discovered that home was not a place but people, and family was not just blood but choice. The photograph itself was buried with Helena, but copies had been made over the years, and those copies hung in the houses of her descendants, a reminder of where they had come from and what they were built on. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, even when you do not know what that choice will lead to. And in a way, Helena's story never ended. It lived on in every descendant who chose love over fear, who built something from nothing, who had the courage to be kind in a harsh world. It lived on in the restaurant that still fed hungry travelers. It lived on in the spring in the canyon where generations of her family went to remember and to dream. She had been fleeing west with only a photograph, running from a life that would have destroyed her. And the cowboy who carried her trunk that first day had indeed become the future she could not picture, a future so much richer and fuller than anything she had imagined possible. That was the real gift Gideon had given her, Helena thought, in those last quiet moments before she died. Not just his love, though that had been everything, but the gift of helping her see that she was worthy of love, that she could build a life on her own terms, that she was strong enough to face whatever came. He had not saved her. She had saved herself. But he had been there, steady and kind and true, offering her a hand to hold as she built the life she wanted. And in the end, that was all anyone could ask for, someone to walk beside you, someone to love you for exactly who you are, someone to help you build the future you could not picture, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time. The desert sunset painted the hills gold and crimson, the way it had for thousands of years and would for thousands more. And somewhere in that vast sweep of sky and stone, the story of Helena Crawford and Gideon Zane lived on, a testament to the power of love, the strength of courage, and the possibility of building something beautiful from the ashes of what came before. Their story ended, as all stories must, with death and grief and the passage of time. But it also never ended, because love like that does not disappear. It transforms, becomes part of the land, and the people and the future that neither of them could picture but both of them built together. One day at a time, with nothing but faith and hope, and an old photograph that reminded them what was worth fighting for.